And welcome back. We have a 2002 Volkswagen Jetta, and both lower control arms on this car are bad, so we're going to go ahead and get both of them changed out today. Now we're mainly going to focus on the right side of the car, which is the easier of the two to do, but there is a bolt on the left lower control arm that's really a pain in the butt to remove. So towards the end of the video, I am going to show you how to remove that specific bolt, so when you get to it, it doesn't really give you a big problem. Now, if you do not have an impact gun, you want to make sure that you loosen your lug bolts while the car is still on the ground, but don't take them off completely. You just want to break them loose. Then you could raise your car. Make sure you use a jack stand. Do not rely on the floor jack because they're not safe at all. And once the car is secure on the jack stand, then you could completely remove the lug bolts. And this car is pretty filthy with salt, so I'm just gonna go ahead and clean this up for you just so it shows up better on camera. Now here's an easy way of checking the bushings on the lower control arm. Just grab a pry bar and you can see exactly where I'm prying, and you see all this movement in the bushing is no good, and that signifies that this thing needs to get changed out. The first thing I'm going to remove is the stabilizer link. So there's just one bolt holding it in place and it came right out, so that was nice. Now I am going to be using impact guns and things like that, and that's just because I have them available and it's going to make the job so much easier for me, but you could still get this job done with basic regular hand tools. And that sound right there, my friends, is the sound of what nightmares are made out of. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause the video right here, and I'm going to use my phone a friend option. You should go check out Thomas's channel. He works on these Volkswagens all day. Now, I knew what I had to get done here in order to fix this problem. I was just hoping to get in contact with him and he would tell me some sort of a special thing to get this bolt free, like, you know, knock on the door 3 times, kick the quarter panel, and release the trunk button, and that this bolt will magically come out. But unfortunately, that's not the case. You're gonna have to cut a hole into the subframe as I did, just to get like a set of vice grips or something on that fastener back here, because as you can see, it's just spinning. And here's the nut that was spinning on the backside. As you can see, there's no flat edges, so you are gonna need a set of vice grips. Now I do apologize for seeing my breath on the screen, but it's really cold in the garage, as you can tell. So that's always fun, right? And luckily this bolt right here has a nut sitting on top, so you can just grab it with your wrench as you remove the bolt from the bottom side. So that was pretty easy, straightforward, and it did not give me any problems at all. Now, if your replacement lower control arm does not come with the ball joint, all you have to do is separate it right here with the 3 fasteners, and you could separate the ball joint from the lower control arm, so you could replace just the lower control arm alone. Now, initially I tried to take it all off as one unit, but it just wasn't happening. The ball joint kept spinning, and it's a very common problem, and it's most likely to happen to you as well. Now there is a trick that you could use with your floor jack. All you have to do is put it right underneath the ball joint and lift up, and it's going to push the ball joint into the knuckle, and that's going to give you that little bit of extra tension, if you will, and it's going to help hold the ball joint in place while you try to remove the nut. The problem in this setup right here is that the nut is going to hit the bottom side of the CV shaft before you could completely remove it, so that turns into another problem. Now there was one benefit to trying to remove the nut even though it's hitting the bottom of the CV shaft, is that once it starts pressing on that CV shaft, it kind of works like a press, and it's going to press the ball joint out of the knuckle, and there it goes, it just popped right out. Now that the ball joint is spinning freely and I can't remove the nut, the only option I have left is to use a set of vice grips on it, but I can't do that with the lower control arm in the way. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove the 3 fasteners and completely remove the lower control arm, and then I'll go back to the ball joint. Now that we have the control arm off of the car, we could get a good look at this bushing, and you could see it's completely destroyed. The one on the left side of the car wasn't as bad, but it was still in need of replacement. So here I have this Moog replacement lower control arm, and here are the part numbers right here on the top left hand side of the screen. Now these part numbers are for the lower control arms that come with the ball joints already attached to them. So if you're not looking to replace your ball joint, then those are not the correct part numbers for you. But if you're going to go through all this trouble to replace your lower control arms, I think it's a wise decision to just go ahead and replace the ball joints. It just makes sense. And now I can focus on removing this ball joint. What I had to do was cut the rubber boot a little bit, and it gave me plenty of space to fit my vice grips in here, and I just clamped down on that ball joint as tight as I can. And now you could remove the nut off of the top because your vice grips are holding that ball joint in place. Wow, look at this. Can you believe this guy? It seems like my nuts are always trying to run away. Get back here. Now, when it comes time to reinstall the new lower control arm, I found it easier to just install this end first, and I'm just gonna go ahead and like knock it in like with a rubber mallet. Try not to do any damage to the paint on here. And once that end is in, you could just kind of push it down and swing it around. There's probably an easier method to do this, but it seemed to work pretty well for me. Now there is a dust cover behind this ball joint, and it's right here. If you end up bending that plate while you're trying to install this ball joint, once you take the car out for a test drive, you're going to hear that loud noise of this dust cover rubbing on your rotor. So if you do end up bending it, just make sure you bend it back into place so it's not in contact anymore. This is that fastener we have to cut the hole in the subframe to get to the backside of. So what I'm going to do here just for added security is use a little bit of blue thread locker here, and I'm actually going to use a nylock nut on the backside, so there should be zero chance of the nut backing out on its own. Now I did think about welding the nut in place how the original one was, but really there isn't much space to get my welder in here. Even if I did manage to get like one tack on it, if you look at the surface, it is kind of rusted up, so you're not going to get that good of a weld on it. On top of that, if anyone ever has to come back in here, I'd hate for them to have to fight against the weld that I put on here, and I definitely don't want to have to fight against it. Sometimes all of the bolt holes can be a little bit tricky to line up, but a screwdriver really does help you to get everything aligned so you can put the bolt back in it. As you can see, the bolt hole for the stabilizer link doesn't really line up. All you have to do is use your floor jack to raise up the lower control arm. And now that everything is aligned, you could reinstall that bolt as well. And at this point, while you have your floor jack applying pressure to the lower ball joint, there's a good time to tighten up the nut on that ball joint. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to fit your torque wrench in here, so just put your wrench on it and just get it as tight as you can. Now, even though the new lower control arm did come with the ball joint already attached to it, you don't want to assume that everything's already torqued down to spec. So it's not going to hurt you to just take the extra time and make sure everything is torqued down properly. Now after you've completed all of the work on your car, keep in mind that changing the lower control arms does throw off the wheel alignment, so you do have to take it into a shop to get a new wheel alignment done. So don't be surprised if your steering wheel is a little bit off center in order to go straight, or if you let go of the steering wheel and the car pulls to the right or to the left. It's perfectly normal. That's just telling you that you need a wheel alignment. And we're almost done here tightening all the bolts, but we still have one more to do on the lower control arm, and that one has to be tightened while the suspension is loaded. Basically, the car should be on the ground or something that can simulate if the suspension is loaded, such as using your floor jack to lift up the lower control arm to simulate load on the suspension, and then you can tighten down this final bolt. Since I have a set of floor ramps here, I'm just going to use the floor ramps because the car just sits way too low for me to slide underneath it. Okay, so I did end up leaving that triangle plate that we cut off of the subframe to get access to that bolt. I did leave it off, but I am spraying everything here with spray paint. I gave it a first coat, I let it dry, came back and gave it a second coat. Now the spray paint that I'm using does say it's for rust and rust prevention and all that stuff. So here's my question to you guys is, do you think I made the right call on leaving the subframe open like this? Or do you think I should have put that plate back on it and just completely welded it shut? Now I thought it just made more sense to leave it open in case somebody else or myself had to come back in here in the future to remove that bolt. So just go ahead and leave a comment below on what your thoughts are on that. And now let's move on to that one bolt on the left side of the car that when you try to remove it from the lower control arm, it's going to hit the pan on the transmission. So there's a few different ways of doing this, but the way I did it here is kind of what made sense to me. I did end up removing the battery and the battery tray, but looking back at it, you may not need to remove your battery, but it definitely made things easier for me, and it made filming so much easier as well. I did struggle a little bit to get this lower battery tray out, but if you remove the air box first where your air filter's at, it makes removing this tray so much easier. I was just doing it backwards. With the airbox out of the way, you can see two of the three fasteners that we need to remove. The first one is here and the second one is back here. Using a universal joint on your 3/8 ratchet really helps. I'm using this big clunky one. I should have really used a smaller one like this one right here. And the final bolt is going to be underneath this plastic cover, which just kind of pops off with a screwdriver. And here's the final bolt that we have to remove. Here's exactly what I was talking about, that when you try to remove the bolt, it's going to hit the pan. So now that we have all three of the fasteners up top removed, or at least loosened up, we're going to put a piece of wood between the floor jack and the oil pan, not to damage anything. And now you just slowly lift up. Now don't go crazy with it. You just want to keep lifting little by little until that bolt just barely clears and you can slide it out. You don't need to go any farther than that. And that's pretty much it. So if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you're considering subscribing, don't forget to hit that notification bell. And like always, thanks for watching.